The evening event was already in full swing when the young waitress stepped through the back hallway. With a tray balanced on her hand, she moved quickly but carefully, wanting to do her job well without drawing attention. The guests were dressed in sharp suits and elegant dresses, speaking in soft, polished voices as they drifted around the hall. Music played from hidden speakers, just enough to fill the air, but not enough to distract from the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. She had worked at many events before, but this one felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the size of the hall, or the number of people, or the way everyone carried themselves. She took a breath and tried to calm her nerves. She moved from table to table, making sure no glass stayed empty for long. People barely noticed her, which was normal. She didn't mind staying invisible. She needed the job, and this one paid well enough to help with rent and bills. Still, she felt a bit out of place. The chandeliers above her glowed like crystal suns. The floor shined so much she could see faint reflections of people passing by. The smell of perfume mixed with the aroma of the food being served in the next room. Everything felt polished and perfect, and she was simply trying not to bump into anyone. At the center of it all stood the host of the night, a millionaire known for his loud gestures and love of attention. He had gathered a wide circle around him, and the people near him laughed at every comment he made, even the ones that didn't seem funny. She tried to avoid his area, not wanting to be noticed. People like him made her uncomfortable. They had a way of looking down on those who served them, even without saying anything. As she passed by the long piano sitting near the far corner of the hall, she slowed for a moment. It was a beautiful instrument, polished and shining under the lights. She felt something quiet stir inside her, a memory, maybe, or a small ache she had carried for a long time. She had played piano once, back when life felt slower and gentler. But that was years ago, before her family had to move, before she had to take work wherever she could find it. She pushed the thought away and went back to work. A group of guests near her were talking about music, discussing who would perform later in the evening. One of them mentioned that the host had spent a large amount of money to bring in a well-known singer. Another joked that the piano looked like it was only there for decoration. Someone else said it would be funny if someone from the staff tried to play it. Their laughter brushed past her like a cold wind. She kept her eyes down and continued serving. But someone in that group had noticed the way she paused by the piano earlier. The comment spread, growing into a small whisper that drifted from one guest to another. It was nothing serious, nothing harmful at first, just idle chatter. But chatter travels fast in a crowded room. Before she realized it, the story had shifted. Someone said, "I think the waitress knows how to play." Another guest added, "Really? Maybe she used to take lessons." It was harmless talk on its own. But once it reached the host, everything changed. She didn't hear the moment he first looked toward her. She was focused on carrying a tray full of drinks, making sure not a single glass slid out of place. But she felt the sudden shift in the atmosphere, a quiet pause, like when a breeze stops before a storm begins. When she turned, she saw the host staring at her with a smile that didn't feel friendly. His eyes sparkled with the kind of interest that never meant something good. He raised his voice. "You there?" he called out, loud enough to grab the attention of people nearby. She froze for a second, unsure if he meant her. But then he motioned with two fingers, a gesture too casual for the authority it carried. She stepped forward slowly, feeling every gaze turn toward her. Her hands tightened around the tray. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Yes, sir." The words felt small in her mouth. He leaned back slightly, as if this moment was simply another form of entertainment to him. "I heard something interesting," he said. "I heard you can play the piano." The guests around him murmured softly, some with amused smiles, others simply curious. She shook her head gently, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to confirm anything either. "It's nothing like that," she said quietly. "I used to learn when I was young, but I don't really." He cut her off with a loud laugh. "Wonderful. Then you won't mind giving us a little show." His voice echoed through the hall, drawing even more attention. A few guests chuckled, expecting something light and funny, maybe even awkward. They weren't unkind, just unaware of how trapped she felt. She stared at the floor, heart beating faster. "Sir, I'm working right now." He waved his hand dismissively. "Just one little tune. It's a party. Relax, we want to be entertained." His tone made it clear he wasn't really asking, and everyone around her understood that too. Someone nearby whispered, "Come on, it'll be fun." Another person added, "It's just a piano. What's the harm?" but they didn't feel the pressure she felt. To them, she was just part of the show. To her, it was her job, her income, her stability. She couldn't risk making him angry. The host tilted his head. "Unless you're afraid," he said with a smirk. The crowd gave a soft laugh at that. The kind of laugh people give when they expect someone to stumble. Her chest tightened. She didn't like attention, and she hated being pushed into something she didn't want to do. But she also knew the power, imbalance in the room. Refusing could bring trouble. She slowly set the tray down on a nearby table, her fingers shaky. The room felt even larger now, every step toward the piano feeling heavier than the last. She wished she could disappear, wished the floor would open up and let her fall through, but she kept walking. The chatter behind her grew quieter as people realized she was actually going to do it. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, staring at the black and white keys. Memories she hadn't touched in years rose inside her, her mother sitting beside her, guiding her tiny hands, the soft sound of music filling their small living room, the way she used to play for hours, lost in her own world. It all felt distant now. She sat down slowly on the piano bench. Her heart thudded in her chest so loudly she wondered if people could hear it. She placed her hands on her lap and tried to breathe. Behind her, the host cleared his throat loudly, wanting to keep the attention centered on the moment. She could feel his eyes on her, waiting to see her fail. The guests leaned in slightly, expecting something clumsy or amusing. The room was filled with polite anticipation and quiet curiosity. No one expected anything more than a simple attempt. They weren't here to judge her talent. They were here to watch a moment unfold, a moment the host had pushed into existence. She stared at the keys again. Her fingers tingled with nerves. She didn't know if she still remembered how to play anything properly. She didn't know if her hands would shake too much. She didn't know if her mind would go blank the moment she touched the keys. But she knew she had no choice now. The room grew silent. She lifted her hands, paused above the keys, and held her breath. This moment would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. She sat there with her hands hovering above the keys, trying to steady her breath. The hall felt too bright, too large, and too quiet. Every thought in her mind rushed at once, and she wondered how she had ended up in this moment. She wasn't a performer. She wasn't dressed for the stage. She was simply a worker trying to get through another shift. But now the entire room watched her like she was supposed to deliver something important. Behind her, she could hear the whisper of expensive fabrics as people leaned forward in their seats. She could hear the faint clink of glasses being set down. Even the air felt like it had paused, waiting. The host, standing not far away, crossed his arms with a grin that made it clear he expected nothing more than a clumsy attempt. He wanted to be amused. He wanted the crowd to laugh. He wanted her to be another moment in his evening of showing off. She looked down at the piano again. The polished surface reflected soft light from the chandelier above. She used to love this sight. She used to love the feel of piano keys under her fingers, the quiet joy that came with each sound she created. But now she felt only fear. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys for the first time in years. She pressed one note. It rang through the room, soft but clear. A few guests exchanged light smiles, thinking the moment was harmless. She felt her face warm with nervous heat. She didn't know if she should play something she remembered or something simple. Her mind searched for familiar patterns, but everything was fogged by stress. Someone near the host whispered, "This should be funny." Another replied, "I hope she doesn't freeze." She heard them even though they spoke softly. Her chest tightened. She wanted to walk away, wanted to return to the safety of her work, but she couldn't. The pressure was too strong, the eyes too many. She closed her eyes again, just for a moment. She tried to let the noise fade, tried to remember the feeling of playing back when she was younger. Her mother always told her that music wasn't just about skill. It was about honesty, about letting your heart speak even when your voice couldn't. A simple melody came to her mind. Nothing grand, nothing meant to impress. Just a small tune she used to play on quiet afternoons long before life became complicated. It was the only thing she could hold on to. Her fingers moved slowly. The first notes drifted out like a soft breeze. The rhythm was shaky at first, like a person taking careful steps after a long time of not walking. But the sound was gentle, warm, and unexpectedly beautiful. The crowd's amusement softened into curiosity. The host's smirk weakened just slightly, though he still looked confident that she would slip soon. But as she continued, her hands grew steadier. The melody began to form a shape, a quiet story of its own. She didn't force anything. She just followed the tune she remembered from years ago, letting her fingers guide her. With her eyes half closed, memories rose like slow waves. Sitting on a small wooden stool as a child, feet barely reaching the ground, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder, the smell of home-cooked food drifting from the kitchen, the sunlight that would fall across the piano keys in their old living room. She had lost those days eventually, but the music still lived somewhere deep. She let those memories carry her. The melody softened, then grew, then softened again. It was simple but full of emotion. People who had come expecting a joke now sat still, listening. Even the servers in the background paused. The host shifted his weight, his grin fading even more. He hadn't expected the atmosphere to change. He liked being the center of attention. But now, every pair of eyes had moved away from him and onto her. She reached the middle section of the tune, and something inside her settled. Her hands finally stopped shaking. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. She wasn't performing for the crowd or the host or anyone else. She was playing for the memory of who she used to be. And that small connection gave her strength. Someone whispered, "This is actually beautiful." Another person nodded. "She plays with feeling." It was quiet praise, not directed at her directly, but carried through the room like a warm breeze. She continued to play, letting each note fall naturally. The melody wrapped around the hall, soft but full of depth. The guests stopped whispering now. They simply listened. Even those who had originally mocked the idea seemed surprised. The host tried to recover his place by joking loudly. "Looks like she practiced more than she let on." But his voice broke the mood, and a few people looked at him in irritation. It was clear he was losing control of the moment. Her fingers moved a little faster now, finding a rhythm that felt familiar, almost comforting. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She wasn't thinking about mistakes. She was only thinking about the way the music made her feel calmer, lighter, almost as if she had slipped into another world. The hall, which had once felt intimidating, now felt smaller, warmer. The lights didn't seem so harsh. The pressure in her chest softened. She thought about all the times she had wanted to play again, but had pushed the desire aside, because life demanded so much from her. This moment wasn't planned, but it reminded her of something she had forgotten. She still had this part of herself. As she continued, the melody grew richer without her noticing. People leaned back, relaxing into the sound. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled gently. No one laughed anymore. She felt the final part of the tune approaching. It was a soft ending, like the closing of a book. She played each note with the same quiet emotion she had carried from the beginning. When the last chord fell into the air, the room remained silent. She let her hands rest on the keys for a moment. She didn't want to turn around. She didn't know what expression the guests wore. She wasn't sure if the host was angry or embarrassed or both. She slowly lifted her hands off the piano and placed them in her lap. For a second longer, there was stillness, then a few claps began. Soft at first, then stronger. More people joined in. The applause wasn't wild or exaggerated. It was genuine, warm, respectful, the kind of response she had never expected. Her breath caught. She kept her eyes lowered, unsure how to react. She wasn't used to being seen, especially not like this. In the crowd, someone said, "She's truly talented." Another replied, "Why isn't she performing somewhere?" She heard it, and her heart tightened with an odd mix of gratitude and sadness. The host finally stepped forward, trying to reclaim the moment. He clapped loudly, forcing a cheerful tone. "Well, that was quite something," he said. But the crowd didn't look at him. They looked at her. She slowly stood up from the piano bench. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stepped back, feeling unsure and overwhelmed. The room felt different now. Not threatening, just unfamiliar. People watched her with new eyes, not as a waitress, but as someone with unexpected talent. She avoided the host's gaze as she walked away from the piano. The applause faded behind her. She reached the corner of the room and picked up the tray she had set down earlier. Her heart still beat fast, but now it was mixed with relief. She didn't know what the rest of the night would bring. She didn't know if the host would be upset. She didn't know if people would still talk about her. But one thing was certain: she had surprised everyone, including herself. And even though she had been pushed into the spotlight, she had shown something real, something she had thought was lost. That small piece of herself now glowed quietly inside her, warm and steady. As she returned to her work, she moved back into the crowd with her tray in hand, but nothing felt the same anymore. The moment she stepped away from the piano, she tried to slip into the background the way she usually did, Yet it was impossible now. People kept glancing her way, some smiling warmly, some whispering to each other with curious expressions. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. Her heart was still beating fast, and her hands hadn't fully stopped trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of what had just happened. She walked toward the far side of the room to refill glasses. She hoped the quiet task would help her settle her nerves. But even there, she felt the shift in the room. When she approached a table, a guest who hadn't paid attention to her earlier now looked up and said, "That was beautiful." Truly, she didn't know how to reply. She simply nodded, offering a small, shy smile. She wasn't used to being noticed for anything other than her job. She wasn't used to people praising her. She had spent so many years trying to keep her head down, trying to stay invisible so things would stay peaceful. But now, the crowd that once overlooked her saw her in a different light. It was unfamiliar, and she didn't know whether to embrace it or run from it. In another corner of the room, the host watched her with a conflicted expression. His smile had faded long ago. He had arranged the moment in hopes of a harmless joke, expecting her to freeze or fumble. He enjoyed small displays of control like that, moments where everyone laughed because he had orchestrated something awkward. But instead, she had taken the spotlight away from him, unintentionally yet completely. His eyes followed her as she moved through the room. He tried to hide his frustration with laughter and loud chatter, but it was clear to anyone watching closely that his mood had soured. He hated losing attention. He hated when something didn't go the way he planned. And most of all, he hated when people admired someone else more than him. She sensed his eyes on her, and it made her uneasy. She tried not to look his way, focusing on her work instead. But every time she stepped back into the main area, she could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Some guests kept praising her softly. Others were curious. A few even whispered things like, "She's better than half the performers I've heard." The compliments were kind, but they also made her nervous. Meanwhile, the host tried to regain the crowd's attention by making bigger gestures, speaking louder, and trying to return the focus to himself. But the room had changed. Music played in the background again, but it felt dull compared to the sound she had created. The warmth she brought lingered in people's minds. As she walked past a group near the center, one man stopped her gently. "Miss," he said, "do you mind if I ask something?" She hesitated, unsure what he wanted, but she nodded. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She blinked, surprised by the question. "At home," she answered softly. "When I was young. I haven't played in a long time." The man looked genuinely impressed. "Well, you have a gift. You should think about performing somewhere real, not just for moments like this." His tone was kind, not pushy, but his words struck something inside her. Perform? The idea felt unreal. She could barely imagine herself on a stage. Life had pushed her far from dreams like that. "Thank you," she said softly before moving away. She finished her rounds quickly, needing a moment to breathe. She slipped into a hallway behind the main event space and leaned against the wall. The quiet there felt comforting. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat start to settle. She had expected humiliation. She had expected to become the joke of the night. Instead, something unexpected had happened. The music had come back to her like a forgotten friend. She hadn't planned it, but once her fingers touched the keys, it felt like something inside her had opened. The hallway door opened softly, and another server stepped inside. He looked at her with a small smile. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Just needed a moment. That was amazing out there," he said. The whole room went quiet. "I've never seen that happen at one of these events." She felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone." "I know," he said. Maybe that's why it worked. She didn't know what to say. She appreciated his gentle words, though they added to the swirl of emotions inside her. When she returned to the hall, she kept her head down again, doing her best to focus on her job. But the room wouldn't let her fade into the background this time. A woman in a red dress approached her with a bright smile. "Dear, that performance was lovely. My brother is a music teacher, and he would be impressed. You really should consider lessons again." Another guest said, "Do you play often?" She simply shook her head. "You really should," the guest added. Her eyes drifted toward the piano. It sat there quietly now, untouched, as if waiting for the next person to bring it to life. She wondered if she would ever play again after tonight. Part of her wanted to. Another part feared it. Across the room, the host called for people's attention again, trying to regain control. He tapped his glass loudly and made announcements about the next course of food, about upcoming entertainment, about anything that would shift attention back to the schedule he had planned. But people weren't as responsive as before. Their minds were still filled with the gentle melody she had created. The host's frustration was clear. His smile looked strained now, and his voice was louder than necessary. She continued with her tasks, trying to avoid him, but it became harder as the night went on. At one point, he stepped directly into her path. She nearly bumped into him. "There you are," he said, his voice light but forced. "You certainly surprised everyone tonight." She didn't know if he meant it as a compliment or something else. "I only played what I remembered," she replied quietly. Yes, he said, waving his hand. "Quite a performance. But you didn't have to try so hard. It was just a little moment to entertain the guests. Nothing serious." The way he said it made her feel small again, as if he wanted to remind her of her place. She lowered her eyes. "I wasn't trying to show anything, of course," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just don't get carried away by the attention. These people praise everything when they've had a few drinks." The comment stung more than she expected, not because she believed him, but because she could see clearly now that her playing had upset him. The guests might be kind, but he held the power in the room. She couldn't afford to make him angry. "I understand," she said quietly. He nodded as if satisfied, then walked away to join another group. She stood there for a moment, trying to shake off the heaviness his words brought. She knew better than to expect kindness from someone like him, yet his reaction still hurt. She had worked so hard to do her job right, to stay invisible and avoid trouble. Now she had done something that drew attention, and it scared her. She didn't want to lose her job, but even with that fear, something inside her refused to shrink. She couldn't ignore the warmth she felt when she played, the way her heart had lifted even for a moment. She didn't want to hide that part of herself forever. As the night went on, more guests approached her gently, thanking her for the beautiful moment she had given them. She responded politely each time, though her mind remained tangled in uncertainty. One older man approached her near the end of the evening. He had a calm presence and kind eyes. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," he said softly, "but when you played, it moved me. I've heard many performers in my life, but few play with such honest feeling." Her breath caught lightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "You have something rare. Don't let life bury it." His words struck her deeply, more than he could have understood. She felt tears threaten the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. When the event began to wind down and the guests started leaving, she helped gather empty glasses and tidy up tables. Her body was tired, but her mind kept returning to the same thought: maybe there was something more inside her than she had allowed herself to believe. She walked past the piano one last time before the night ended. She ran her fingertips lightly across its smooth surface, a quiet promise forming in her heart. Maybe playing again wasn't just a memory. Maybe it was a part of her that she wasn't meant to lose. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if the night had opened a door or simply reminded her of something she had forgotten. But she walked out of the hall with a different feeling, a small spark of hope glowing inside her, steady and warm, refusing to fade. The night felt heavier than any night before. After the performance, the room still carried the echo of the last note she played. People whispered in small clusters, their voices low and unsure, like they were afraid to speak too loudly after what they had just witnessed. The grand hall no longer felt like a place where she had been mocked. Instead, it felt like a place that had been changed by something unexpected and real. She stood near the piano, unsure of what to do next. Her hands, still slightly shaking, rested at her sides. She didn't feel fear now. It was something else, something warm, something she had not felt in a very long time. She tried to take a slow breath, but her chest felt tight, like she had been holding back years of emotions that were finally trying to escape. People were still looking at her, some with surprise, others with something that almost looked like guilt. A few guests approached her, saying simple things like "that was amazing" or "I didn't expect that." But they didn't know how to say more. They didn't know what it meant for someone like her to stand on a stage, meant for the wealthy and powerful. She gave polite nods, soft smiles, and simple thank yous. She didn't hold any anger toward them. She only wanted the moment to pass without more attention. She wasn't used to being seen. She had lived most of her life in quiet corners, moving quickly, speaking carefully, never staying in the center long enough for anyone to question why she was there. From the back of the hall, she saw the millionaire again. He hadn't moved much since her final note. He stood stiff and silent, as if trying to understand what he had just watched. His face held no mockery now, It held confusion, maybe even regret. But she didn't look at him for long. She turned away and pretended not to notice. One of the older guests, a woman dressed in silver, approached her with gentle steps. She looked kind, the sort of person who didn't speak to show off but spoke because she meant what she said. She touched the waitress lightly on the arm. "My dear," the woman said softly. "That was not something we see every day. You played with such heart. It felt pure." The waitress lowered her eyes. "Thank you. I just played what I remembered." "Then you remembered something beautiful," the woman replied. For a moment, the waitress felt her throat tighten again. Not from fear this time, but from something deeper. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. She blinked quickly, trying not to let tears form. She had cried enough in her life. Tonight wasn't supposed to be one of those nights. The woman gave her a warm smile before turning away and walking back to her group. The waitress watched her go, then looked around the hall again. The guests were calming down now, settling back into their evening like the performance had been a small storm that passed too quickly to fully understand. She stepped away from the piano. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to return to her job or leave the hall entirely. She didn't know what the rules were after something like this. No one had ever prepared her for a moment where the world shifted without warning. As she walked toward the side of the room, a younger guest intercepted her. He was smiling in a friendly but slightly nervous way, like he didn't know how to approach her without sounding foolish. "Hey, you're playing was. I don't even know how to say it," he stammered. "It was just really special." She nodded gently. "Thank you. Do you play anywhere else?" he asked. "Like, do you perform?" Her answer came quietly. "No, I used to play as a kid, but not anymore." "You should," he said. "Really? People would love to hear you." She smiled softly, though she didn't believe him. People like her didn't get chances like that. She wasn't the kind of person who belonged on a stage. She belonged in the shadows of rooms like this, holding trays and keeping her head down. When the young man walked away, she finally made her way toward the small service hallway that led back to the kitchen. Her steps felt heavier now. The adrenaline from the performance was fading, and reality was slowly returning. Once she stepped into the quiet hallway, she stopped and leaned against the wall. She let out a breath she had been holding since the first note. Her palms pressed against her face, and she tried to steady herself. She heard someone approaching. Light footsteps, calm, not hurried, not angry. When she lowered her hands, she saw the restaurant manager stepping toward her. He looked serious, but not harsh. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I think so." He took a moment before speaking again. "You surprised everyone tonight. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quickly. "You didn't." His voice softened. "You handled everything better than most people would." She looked away, unsure of how to respond. "The owner," the manager continued, referring to the millionaire, "wants to speak to you." Her stomach tightened. She shook her head. "I don't want to talk to him." "I understand," the manager said, "but I think you should. Maybe this will be different." She wasn't convinced. The humiliation she had expected earlier had turned into something else. But that didn't erase the way he had treated her. She didn't owe him anything, but she also knew refusing might cause more trouble later. She sighed quietly. "Where is he?" "In the hall, near the piano, the place where it all happened." She took a deep breath and walked back toward the main room. The guests had begun leaving, some gathering near the exit while others lingered in small groups. The hall felt calmer now, quieter, almost peaceful. She saw him standing next to the piano, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. She approached slowly, stopping a few steps away. "You wanted to speak to me," she said gently. He turned to face her. His voice, usually sharp and confident, was softer now. "I owe you an apology." She didn't say anything. She waited. "I shouldn't have pushed you to play," he continued. "I thought it would be amusing. I didn't think about how it would make you feel." Still, she said nothing. He took a breath. "You played with more heart than anyone I've ever heard. You showed something real, something I didn't expect." She finally spoke. "You didn't have to humiliate me to find that out." His eyes lowered. "You're right." The hall felt very still. After a moment, he lifted his head again. "I want to make things right. Maybe I can help you. If you want to play again, I can make that happen." Her chest tightened. The idea sounded impossible, too good, too dangerous. "I'm not looking for favors," she replied quietly. "I just want to do my job and live my life." He nodded. "I understand, but the offer is there. No pressure." She looked at the piano behind him. the instrument that had brought out a part of her she thought she'd buried forever. I don't know what I want yet, she admitted. That's all right, he said. Think about it. She stepped back slowly, feeling the weight of the night settle into her shoulders. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what this meant for her life. But she did know one thing. Her music wasn't gone. It had been waiting inside her all this time. And now the world finally heard it. The next morning arrived with a soft light that slipped through her small apartment window. She sat at the edge of her bed, still trying to understand everything that had happened the night before. Even though she tried to keep herself calm, her mind kept replaying the music she had played in the hall. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her and somehow walked out unchanged on the outside but different on the inside. She ran her fingers across her palms. They no longer shook. Instead, there was a gentle warmth there, a quiet reminder that her music had returned. Whether she liked it or not, it was awake again. She fixed her uniform and tied her hair back before leaving for work. The streets were calm, and the cold morning air helped her steady herself. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she hoped it would be ordinary. She hoped no one would talk about last night. She wasn't ready to face questions or attention. But when she walked into the restaurant, the quiet morning changed instantly. A few of her co-workers turned to look at her. Some smiled, some whispered to each other, and one even gave her a small thumbs up. She tried to smile back, though part of her wanted to disappear into the kitchen. The manager walked over to her. His expression was calm, but there was a new softness in his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. "Before you start your shift, the owner wants to see you again." Her heart tightened. She looked down, unsure if she wanted another conversation with him. But she nodded. "Where is he?" "In his office this time." She walked down the hall toward the office door. She took a breath, then lightly knocked. "Come in," his voice said from inside. She stepped into the room. He stood near his desk, dressed more casually now, as if last night had changed something in him too. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded slowly. He gestured for her to sit, but she chose to stand. She didn't want to feel too comfortable in this space. "I know you didn't want attention," he began, "and I know you didn't ask for any of what happened last night. But something important came from it." She remained quiet. "You reminded us all of what real talent looks like," he continued. "Not trained showmanship, not money, just heart." She looked at the floor. "I only played what I remembered, and that was enough to move an entire room," he replied. "That is rare." She didn't know what to say. Compliments made her uncomfortable. Praise didn't sit well on her shoulders. He stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "I want to support your music. Not for show, not for entertainment. I mean it. You have something powerful, and if you want to do something with it, I can help you find a path." She shook her head gently. "I don't think I'm ready for something like that." "You don't have to decide today," he said quickly, "or tomorrow, or even next month. But don't let your talent go quiet again. The world needs more real moments like the one you gave us." She felt her chest tighten, not in fear, but in something close to hope. "Can I still work here?" she asked softly. He smiled, not a proud smile, but a kind one. "Of course. This is your place too." She nodded gratefully. After a quiet moment, she left the office and returned to her work. But everywhere she turned, she felt the shift in the air. People looked at her differently now, not with pity or judgment, but with respect. It was strange. She wasn't used to being seen this way. By noon, as she cleared tables and delivered orders, she overheard guests at nearby tables talking about the mystery pianist from last night. They didn't know her name, and she preferred it that way. She didn't want fame. She only wanted to feel normal. But deep down, she wondered if this moment was trying to guide her somewhere she never thought she could go. Later in the evening, as the dinner rush slowed down, the manager approached her again. "There's someone waiting for you by the piano," he said. She hesitated. "Who?" "A music teacher," he answered. "I think the owner asked him to stop by." Her heart skipped. She wasn't sure she was ready for this, but she walked toward the piano anyway. An older man stood beside it, looking over the keys as if studying them for secrets. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You must be the one who played last night," he said with a warm smile. She nodded shyly. "I'm not a performer. I can tell you're not trained professionally," he said kindly, "but I can also tell that your heart guides your hands better than any training could." She looked at the piano. "I don't know if I want to play again in front of people." "That's all right," he said. "Playing for yourself is just as important." He opened the lid of the piano gently. "Would you like to play something?" Not for me. For you. She hesitated, then looked at the keys. Her fingers twitched with memory. Slowly, she took a seat. She pressed a single note. It rang through the quiet hall, warm and familiar. Then another dot and another. A melody formed, not the dramatic piece from the night before, but something softer, something that had lived quietly in her heart for years, something only she understood. The teacher watched quietly, not judging, not analyzing. When she finished, he nodded. You have a gift, he said. If you ever want to grow it, I'll be here. She didn't answer, but the faint smile on her face told him she had heard him. As the days passed, life at the restaurant returned to normal. Guests eventually stopped talking about the mysterious pianist, and the whispers faded. But something in her didn't fade. She found herself staying after closing some nights, touching the piano keys when no one was around, playing small melodies that helped her breathe. The millionaire never pushed her again, but whenever he passed by and heard the faint sound of her playing, he would pause, listen, and walk away quietly, respectfully. One evening, the older woman in silver, the same one who had spoken kindly to her the night of the performance, returned for dinner. She recognized the waitress instantly. You look lighter, the woman said gently. The waitress smiled. I've been playing again. The woman nodded. Good. The world needs more moments like the one you gave us. You don't have to chase fame. Just keep your heart alive. Those words stayed with her. Weeks turned into a month. She met with the music teacher once a week, not as a student, but as someone rediscovering a lost part of herself. She didn't tell many people. She kept it close, like something fragile. One night, after the restaurant closed, she played a piece she had been working on quietly for days. The notes flowed softly, filling the empty hall with something warm and peaceful. When she finished, she noticed the owner standing in the doorway, listening. He didn't speak. He didn't clap. He simply nodded. You found your music again, he said quietly. She nodded back. I think so. Good, he replied. Don't lose it this time. She looked at the piano, then at her hands. I won't, she said. And she meant it. Her life didn't magically change. She didn't suddenly become famous or rich. She still worked at the restaurant, still lived in her small apartment, still carried the same gentle spirit she always had. But now, her music lived again. And for the first time in years, she felt whole, not because of applause, not because of pride, but because she had reclaimed a part of herself she thought was gone forever. And sometimes, that kind of victory is the most beautiful of all.